Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me for the Talent Cafe on the 12th of June. I'd like to share with you a couple of thoughts on employee engagement in Namibia. So this is Sagrada Familia. It's a church, it's a cathedral that they're building in Barcelona in Spain. And they've been building this cathedral for over 100 years. It is designed by a guy called Antonio Gaudi, who had a very interesting concept to create an inner chamber or an inner hall inside Sagrada Familia that doesn't have the roof supported by numerous pillars. Anyway, it's a fascinating building, and if you ever find yourself in Barcelona, do go and visit the site. They might be done by then. As you can see, they're still building, and they tell the story about a newspaper reporter that went and interviewed some of the builders in this building. And they interviewed 3 bricklayers. Asked the first person, "What are you doing?" And his answer was, "I'm laying bricks," literally putting one brick on top of another. They asked the second bricklayer, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm building a wall." So he went over to the third builder and asked him, "What are you doing?" And the third person said, "I'm building a house of God, building a place of worship." Now, this is what we see in our employees and employee engagement in our companies, is that the first person is completely disengaged with the job, can't see the bigger picture, can't be bothered to be there, literally just putting one brick on top of another. The second person is neither engaged nor disengaged. They have their KPIs, they have their objectives, they do what they need to do to get through the day, and they neither engaged nor engaged. The third person, however, is fully engaged in his job, probably going the extra mile, putting those bricks down absolutely perfectly, seeing the big picture, understanding that I'm not just laying bricks, I'm actually building a place of worship, a place where people come to serve their God and their Creator. So this is the background to employee engagement that I'd like to share with you today. And in a few minutes, I'd like to go through the background of engagement, the benefits of engagement, the basics, what happens before employees get engaged, how do we build engagement in our companies, and the business case should you wish to take this to higher powers to get funding or projects approved in this particular area. So the background to employee engagement really comes from research on burnout. And around about sort of 1998, 99, with the dot-com bubble and the economy really booming at the time, specifically in the States, probably around the world, they found this thing that they called yuppie flu. And all of a sudden, high-performing people, yuppies in this case, rich, young, kind of people making lots of money, doing lots of work, just all of a sudden, burnt out and they had this unexplained persistent fatigue. This was unrelated to the amount of work they were doing, because they found others were doing the same amount of work, same levels of effort, same sort of results, but they're not struggling the same way that this group of people did. Taking a long holiday didn't particularly relieve this. They suffered from impaired memory or concentration and struggled with sleeping. At the same time, Martin Seligman became the head of the American Psychological Association, and he really brought positive psychology to the forefront and really drove research into positive psychology, empirically based, evidence-backed positive psychology, because he asked the question, he says, we've spent so many years identifying what's wrong with people. We now need to focus on what's right with people, and how can we unlock genius, was his words. How can we unlock this potential in people? And so the question turned from what's making people burn out to what's making people engage. How are there still people who are doing the same levels of work with the same outcomes, but they are not burning out? They are engaging, they are uplifting, they're motivated to motivate their teams, etc., etc. So moving from there, obviously we need to have some benefit to continue researching this particular topic. And we found that there are individual as well as organizational benefits from having an engaged workforce or being engaged as an employee yourself. So the Gallup survey found that things like customer loyalty, productivity, profitability, turnover, absenteeism, shrinkage, and your talent pool are all influenced by having an engaged workforce or engaged employees. So things like productivity, turnover, obviously staff turnover, decreased staff turnover, decreased absenteeism, decreased theft really from your company, as well as having an increased talent pool is fairly sort of easy to understand. The talent pool they're referring to, by the way, is really, it refers to other people who want to come and work for your company because they hear such good things about your company. But things like customer loyalty are also increased, and profitability. By having more loyal customers, we all know it costs a lot more money to find new customers than keeping our existing customers. And this makes the company profitable in general. So that would probably be the first things you would look at to build a business case around this for your employers or for your higher level decision makers if you're not a decision maker yourself. But they also found that there were individual benefits to being engaged. And these things include things like having more meaning in your job, being more efficient in your job, getting more done in less time. People who are engaged earn more. They get more commissions, get more promotions, etc., and they are better managers in an organization, as well as sort of a softer kind of thing, which is the improved self-concept of the person. It takes us back to almost the start of psychology as a discipline. People like Alfred Bandura that investigated self-efficacy and mastery. People have an improved self-concept because they feel better about themselves, they feel better about the work they're doing, they feel that they're actually contributing to the broader society rather than just sort of pushing paper or counting beans, if you like that expression. So in the research then, this definition sort of comes up where people are in a work-related state of mind, and this work-related state of mind is characterized by these three elements. So there's vigor, literally physical exertion or physical effort. There is absorption, which is almost at a cognitive level, being challenged in your job, being challenged in the position, the tasks that you have to do that absorbs you in this particular role. This idea of sort of looking up and somebody says, aren't you going home? And it's 5 o'clock and you didn't realize, sort of the home time bell rang and it's time to go because you're that absorbed in the job. And then finally, almost an emotional dedication to the company that you're working for. At an emotional level, feeling positive emotions about the organization that you're working for. So those three things, vigor, absorption, and dedication, form the basics of employee engagement. Now, in my research, which this presentation is built on, we found that there were some elements or predictors or antecedents that happen before people engage. And these can roughly be characterized in these three areas that we call psychological safety, psychological availability, as well as psychological meaningfulness. And together, those three things help us to identify or help an employee to engage. So these three things, the safety, the availability, the meaning, are almost mediators to employee engagement. So some of the things that predicted employee engagement were things like work role fit. Do you see yourself as the thing that you're doing? We often find people go and study a particular qualification, they can't find a job, and then they become a salesperson. So they don't see themselves as a salesperson, they see themselves as something else, and then they can't engage because there's no work role fit. A decreased self-consciousness. If you're consistently worrying about what other people are thinking about you and how you present to others, it's going to be difficult for you to have that absorption, for example, that we spoke about in the previous slide. Supervisor relations, the relationship that you have with your supervisors as well as your colleagues, also creates that safety environment where you feel that you can be your whole self at work and you don't have to hide something. Of course, rewards, monetary, non-monetary rewards, having the actual resources to do the job. I remember working with an insurance company where people were tasked to sell a certain amount of policies or products, and they were in a remote location, clients were far dispersed from each other, and they weren't provided with transport to get from point A to point B. And these people couldn't engage in their jobs because it's physically impossible to do the job. You can't see 4 or 5 clients in a day if you have to walk 10, 15, 20 kilometers between different clients. Job enrichment, sort of going back to the basics, the start of almost organizational behavior and organizational psychology, seeing the big picture, not just doing one tiny element of a job, but really sort of seeing the project through, not just writing the proposal, but maybe going and implementing the job that you wrote down in this proposal. Support overall from an organization. I think this is relevant in the current world of work that we're in at the moment. Supporting mental health and wellness in our employees, for the employee to actually see that. In our research, we actually spoke about perceived organizational support. And we often see this, companies have got all these programs, nobody uses it. So there's no perceived support to say, listen, the organization actually cares about me as a person. And then job demand and job resources relates to a certain extent back to what I was saying earlier about having the resources. You can ask, Jim Collins, in Good to Great, he talks about big, hairy, audacious goals in a company. You can set big, hairy, audacious goals in your organization. These are the job demands, but you need to follow that up with having the right job resources. Now, all of those things together, if they are in place, it's more likely that people will engage. It's likely that they'll feel safe. It's likely that they will have resources available, cognitive, physical resources to a certain extent, and it's likely that they will then see the bigger picture and see the meaningfulness in their jobs and then engage in their particular roles. So then the question is practically, and I like to, sort of come up with practical solutions for all of these, weird and wonderful HR interventions that we sometimes have. It's nice to speak about engagement, but how do we build it? How do we create engagement? And to me, it's fairly simple. I don't believe in having this huge engagement intervention in an organization, hoping that this once-off thing will create, more employee engagement in the company. I prefer sort of, structured change in the organization over time. And these are the 3 things, as we found in my research, that helps or mediates or underlies employee engagement is that first, that psychological safety. Now, the idea really is in contrast to micromanagement. If you've constantly got somebody looking over your shoulder, checking what you're doing, commenting and telling you what you're doing wrong, you're not going to feel safe in that particular environment. Also, if you're feeling that your colleagues are going to backstab you and your colleagues are out to get you, it's going to be very difficult for you to engage in that particular role in the organization, or not just in the role, but in the company as a whole. So to fix that, to build employee engagement, we then recommend that you do team building. So I've now jumped onto the second one. But feeling safe in the company, not being backstabbed, not having all this office gossip and politicking, we can do team building. We can help our employees to, get to know each other better, to spend time with each other, not specifically in a work-related setting, to help and to understand, different people, different cultures. All of these topics are very relevant today in the current world of work. So, co-worker relations, if we improve that, people will feel safer. In terms of availability, I mentioned this already. Supervisors, checking over your shoulder the whole time, that you can't sort of cognitively engage with your job because you're constantly worrying who's going to show up and tell you that what you're doing is wrong, or who's going to show up and comment, in most cases negatively on what you're doing. So to improve that availability. Also, leaders who delegate and who support and empower their employees, all of this allows you to engage. If you have to stop your work and go and ask for permission, instead of being empowered to make a decision, it breaks that cognitive absorption that we spoke about when we looked at the engagement model. So to have more availability, to train our leaders in the organization, to help them to improve their delegation skills. And then finally, to improve job role fit, to create meaningfulness, we can implement things like psychometric testing, career guidance, career planning, mapping of our top performers or anybody in the organization to improve their feeling of meaningfulness on a personal level. Where am I going in this company, but also in a bigger picture level to understand and to feel part of your job, to have that increased work role fit. There are other things we can also do in the meaningfulness category. And one of the exercises that we often ask our employees is, our clients when we do interventions is, how does your job influence my grandmother? How does what you do improve my granny's life? Now, if you think, for example, like a post office worker, when you go to the counter there, that person is sticking on stamps and weighing parcels and all this kind of stuff. Now, if they realize that this is maybe the only contact I have with my grandmother, or the opposite, I was standing in the queue in the post office behind somebody a while ago, and the grandmother was posting Christmas presents to her grandchildren who had immigrated somewhere else, Australia, New Zealand, or wherever. And then this was her point of contact. So if that post office worker realizes that you are playing an essential role, your job, however meaningless it seems to you, in this other person's life, connecting them to their grandchildren, that surely that creates meaning. So we ask that question: how does your job influence my grandmother? So that would be, somehow some way that we can create meaningfulness in our employees. So the business case, I've touched on this already. If you have to go and convince, HR chiefs, if you're not the HR chief yourself, why should we worry about employee engagement? These are the things here. We mentioned lower absenteeism. We know that absenteeism costs companies thousands of dollars every year. Having people just show up for work and do their jobs, will save the company money and obviously increase their productivity, which is the second level. People work harder, they do more with less. There's higher productivity in the organization. Finally, lower turnover, not finally, but the third element from an organizational level, replacing staff. And I've spoken to some people in the reward industry, the compensation and reward industry, where a while ago they were quoting figures like something like 6% salary increases. People are willing to leave their jobs, move on to another job for a salary increase of 6%. That's almost not even inflationary, or recently it hasn't been inflationary. So replacing employees is very expensive for a company, and if we can decrease our employee turnover, it will save the company money. And then finally, there's a dual purpose. You're not just doing it for yourself; you're also doing it for the employee. By being more engaged, the employee feels like they're a better person in themselves, and they feel like they're a better employee overall. So those are my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope you enjoyed the Talent Cafe, and we hope to see you for the next one pretty soon. Thank you very much.